Hello and welcome to the Empathic Designer podcast. I'm your host Vaidishwaran. One of the most common reasons attributed to poor quality training materials is cognitive overload. Cognitive overload is a condition where the working memory receives more information than it can process under normal conditions, and this has an impact on the effectiveness of that information. And the source of this overload manifests in various forms. So let us try to understand some of them in this episode. So let us start with the most obvious one: too much content. The human brain learns by association and comparison. When new information is received, the brain tries to associate or compare this information with the existing knowledge in order to store this information. When there is a completely new set of information, the brain needs to function much harder to create those associations. Let us take an example. Let us suppose you are to visit someone in a neighborhood where you haven't been to in your own city. Now let us compare this with visiting someone in a new city in a different country where you don't speak the local language. Having too much content on a single page has a similar effect on your learners. It is therefore a good idea to chunk the content under a logical structure and breaking it down into multiple pages. I recommend talking about just one idea per screen to make it more effective. The next factor that can cause cognitive overload is providing the learners with too many options. I have seen this happen quite a few times when designers try to gamify content and in that process lose the battle between displaying all of the content to the learners and gamifying it. I once remember a treasure hunt game that I played which had about 5 to 6 different options for the learners to choose from, with the details of the path, their durations and their goals not clearly defined. It really felt like jumping into a black hole with the fear and frustration of missing out on important content by not picking any of the other options. While reducing the number of options would be the ideal solution, if that is not possible, they can be categorized and arranged into manageable sections. Amazon's website is a good example for this. And this brings me to the next point where cognitive overload happens as a result of creating multiple levels or layers of interactivity to house content. While categorization is a good idea for chunking heavy content, arranging them in multiple levels results in the user having to click into 2 or more levels to access the content, and this makes the learners feel disoriented in terms of where they are within the learning and how they should come back to the original page. This makes them lose focus on the learning itself. It is at this point where you should consider breaking down the content into different sections and create a roadmap or a curriculum for the learners on how to access this content. Cognitive overload is also caused due to unnecessary and redundant actions for the learners to perform within the learning experience. Starting from pointless hoverovers to buttons that serve no real function in the learning process, they result in slowing down the pace of the learning and distracting the learner by making them perform unnecessary tasks that doesn't really help the learners achieve their learning objectives. A simple way to overcome this is to read the storyboard or the prototype design again with the sole purpose of identifying redundancies and removing them. It's human nature to pursue the easiest solution and the shortest route to complete a task, and a good learning program enables this. Cognitive overload also happens as a result of having learners split their attention between different elements of the screen to understand the content or the concept. This is known as the split attention effect. This typically happens in both e-learning and classroom-based trainings where the learner has to piece together the image and the on-screen text to understand the concept. This typically happens when explaining technical concepts through drawings and while using graphs to interpret data. You can overcome this by making an effort to understand the content and by really talking to your subject matter experts to explore avenues on recreating the self-explanatory assets. Another cause for cognitive overload is the use of ambiguous user interfaces and icons. Figuring out how to work through a user interface and the interactive elements is one of the biggest put-offs for learners, as it clearly wastes their time and they're not here for that. This is the easiest cognitive overload to overcome though, as you can avoid this by simply not reinventing the wheel. Designing on-screen elements that are intuitive and familiar to the users goes a long way in reducing cognitive overload for your learners. The final factor on my list that can create cognitive overload in learning is inconsistency in design elements. Using consistent styles for on-screen elements like titles, body text, captions, etc. goes a long way in reducing cognitive overload, as it puts the learners at ease when it comes to understanding the hierarchy, structure, and flow of your content. Any inconsistency sticks out like a sore thumb, drawing the learner's attention to it rather than the content. The best way to overcome this is by creating a style guide for your program and using editorial tools to ensure a seamless learning experience for your learners. Thanks a lot for tuning into this week's edition of the Empathic Designer podcast. If you like what you heard, go ahead and hit the subscribe button for getting those regular updates from my channel. You can also hit the bell icon to be notified on the latest episodes as I upload them to my channel. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave your message in the comment section below, and I'll be glad to have a conversation with you. Thank you and have a wonderful day.